Okay. Hello, everybody. It's Brett Thompson here, the co-creator of Digital Discourse ZA, and I'm really excited about the conversation that we're going to be having today. I've got here with me, or not right with me, but quite close to me, is TK Pooe, who is quite an interesting guy that's going to be talking about some issues facing the country in terms of the political landscape that we find ourselves in. But before I get involved, TK, maybe if you can introduce yourself and tell us a bit about you.
All right, no, thanks for having me, Brett. I'm a public policy specialist by training. Worked in local government, also worked in provincial government. Currently lecturing. I've done some consulting on the side. My interest in policy, stems from the fact that I think when I was taught at graduate level, it was the fact that, listen, all government action is policy. And I never pictured myself as a good politician. I think it's not my calling in life, so to speak. But we've seen, I come from a small township in southwest of Joburg, and we've seen the good and the bad side of policy. So that's my interest in policy, the fact that you can actually change people's life through policy, and hence that's my interest in it. Lecturing, well, look, it's exciting when you do it. Hate marking, but but outside that, look, those are my key interests, and that's what I'm currently busy with at the moment.
Okay, excellent. So, yeah, it's really good to have you, and I'm really looking forward to sort of unpacking some of the news items and stories that are sort of been happening around the elections. Look, it's today, the recording is the 23rd of May, so elections have been done and dusted. I think people in South Africa maybe have a bit of election fatigue, but I think it'll be interesting to sort of have a bit of a post-mortem on what we had, a couple of weeks back now, or a week ago, and I just wanted to sort of hear your insights, just a sort of a broad overview of how you thought the election was run, and then also just sort of maybe some of the bigger winners and losers out of the election, with maybe some focus on the big four.
Oh, okay then. I'll start with the winners. I think obviously the fact that the ANC got 57, they were a bit. I think they're a bit worried. So the fact that they got the majority, the fact that they got to slimly keep Gauteng, which makes them a winner. And I think it also shows our voter, I think in economics there's a term called inelasticity. I always get that word wrong. Yeah. Which shows that, look, voters tend to, for everything we've hypothesized about the South African voter, I think we still have to do a lot more research as to what makes an average ANC voter. Look, I'll speak from my personal point of view. My parents are very big ANC complainers, yet the weirdest thing is during election, I think they bust my brother back from varsity at Potchefstroom to say, you will come vote for the ANC or there will be no pocket money for you. So it just basically shows you, look, the ANC voter is a very, I want to say rational but irrational voter at the same time. And obviously for the second big winner for me would have to be a party like the Freedom Front Plus. I know people will be surprised, why would you start with them over the EFF? Would be, initially, look, they're doubling their numbers. There's a message which, whether you like it or not, there's a message which they stick to, which is finding resonance, especially among, I'd say you're not fair weather, but let's rather say your traditional Democratic Alliance members, which I think creates an interesting concoction going forward as to what does it mean for the DA? Because as long as we've known the DA, they've always been the party that locks down the minority populations in South Africa. Now, the interesting thing about the Freedom Front Plus, I doubt they'll ever want to be a metamorphosis in the same way the DA has been trying to do. So that for me is very interesting. And I think the losers, and I'll say losers with a small L rather than a big L, would be obviously the EFF. And I say this because going into the election, if I think there was one article which was written, if Twitter was the voting public, Julius Malema would be president. And I think the media sometimes, I think does, I'll say maybe a bit more clear, mainstream media does a bit of disservice by, I think, not actually articulating what the EFF is in relation to the rest of society. Because if you were to really believe mainstream media, the EFF was going to romp away. And it's, I think we spoke about it last week, is that if you actually put all the numbers together of both the EFF and the DA, they still don't come up to what the ANC is. So as much as it's grown nationally, I think that if for me, I'll speak from the Northwest Province. If for me, I had to say, wow, the EFF is really a serious party to be reckoned with. They should have taken the ANC below 60% in places like the Northwest Province and Limpopo. So that for me is a larger reason. the bigger loser for me is, look, it's the fact that people didn't vote. I think there was I think you correct me, 9 million or so people that didn't vote.
Well, I mean, the numbers have been quite interesting to look at, but you know, I think the percentage ones I find is the most interesting thing. In terms of turnouts in 1999, we had something like 89%, and then it moved to 73.4 in 2014, and then this year we clocked in at just under 66%. So that's been a steady decline in overall turnouts. And I also found another one was. It seems like there was more than 18 million eligible voters, more than half the electorate actually didn't vote. So I mean, again, there's a number of sort of sources for this and how we can look at it and how we can analyze. But regardless of what we say, clearly people were cynical and stayed home.
Yeah, and I think that for me that means the Republic with a large L is a bigger loser. Now, look, I used to live in Australia, so I'm for mandatory voting. By that I mean I don't really care who you vote for. Look, as long as you just turn up and at least make a decision on the day. And I think, look, most tests which scientists have run, especially political scientists have run when it comes to this, is that you might tell yourself, I'm going to go there and not vote and just spoil a ballot. You end up actually voting, truth be told.
Yeah.
For me, the bigger worry is when people start to no longer believe that the system works, as in there's nothing for me in it, they become more desperate, and that for me literally means I think the country is a bigger loser than anything else.
And you see, I mean, you probably see people, it boils out more into the streets. Maybe there's more civil unrest, more protest action. It seems to be now almost like a common occurrence. I mean, I'm calling out the Western Cape, and it's just a routine event now that highways are closed, and there's, I think there was the Two Oceans half marathon rather, which was disrupted because of potential protest action. So people maybe are not seeing that the ballot box is helping them, and even if they do vote, they're not going to see the change. So they're finding other needs. But I don't want to sort of go into that realm just yet. I want to sort of double back to what you spoke about with Australia and having mandatory voter registration and voting. Because I mean, their numbers is like 91% or roughly the number of turnouts. And there's quite a spread. I mean, you've got the US, I think it's about 65, UK 69. Interesting enough, Zimbabwe is about 83% turnout in their last elections, which I was kind of struck when I came across that. I don't know how true these numbers are. If that's just there's on a PF saying that's how many people they decided to vote. But you know, I mean, maybe what is it saying? Is it people don't believe that Cyril Ramaphosa can make a difference? People just said it's a foregone conclusion that he's going to win. What are some of the plays around the turnout that you can think of?
I think one can read it in two ways. If you look at the ones that actually voted, if you look at I think if you do the split between national and province, most people at national level, there's actually a bit of a discrepancy between the ANC votes and what they got at province, which is people split their vote. And especially the Western Cape was actually very bizarre, because you tend to find people actually vote in the Western Cape, actually tended to vote for the ANC nationally, which can be seen as people saying, look, I actually like Cyril, the person, I'll vote for him. I just don't like the party. Now, for the ones that stayed at home, I think was a simple issue of saying, listen, we've done this song and dance before, where we're told that our vote counts and we must come and we must be part of it, but it's not really working. And I think the danger for me is that I think cynicism is actually now spreading into rural areas, and that's where the ANC used to, look, I think without even trying, they would get votes there. So for me, it's that cynicism which is really kicking in, and people are saying, look, I'm not even going to bother and waste my time anymore. I'm not getting anything from the party, and whoever represents the party, we really don't care.
Yeah, I mean, I came across quite an interesting interactive map. I mean, there were hosts of these doing the rounds, and just showing by ward and by, obviously most of the times it was which party won which ward. But I found a map that came across sort of voter turnout by region in South Africa, and sort of I'm just looking at it from a broad overview, and it kind of seems to say that urban dwellers seem to be voting still, but rural people not so much. The red is primarily in the urban areas, and then in the cities people are voting. And also, interesting enough, the Northern Cape seemed to have quite a fair amount of voter turnout compared to the rest of the country. But I'm just looking at it from a very sort of top-down approach. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
No, I think it's more of a worry than anything else, because usually, especially if you look at liberation movements on the continent, this actually bucks the trend. Usually it's the city dwellers that actually stop to vote. Okay. And it will be the rural, if ZANU's power, ZANU, even Mugabe, for all his wrong, he still could get his rural voters out. So it's actually quite odd if you're saying it that way, because it says that this is actually turning the upside down a bit. That if anything, if the ANC is going to, in the future, if any party is going to topple the ANC, there's actually stand a good chance if they were to actually target the rural areas. I think what is interesting, this is maybe where one of the small winners, or the W, would be the IFP. Because if there is a party who, and look, and I think here we just specifically speak about the KZN, which happens to be one of the biggest voting blocks in the country. If there is a way you really would want to cut the ANC down at rural level, the IFP is one of those parties which knows the trick due to their history in rural politics.
Do you think there's some elements, with KZN was always Jacob Zuma's sort of stronghold, with him sort of no longer being involved with the party? Do you think that might have been an explanation with why the IFP might have be seen as a winner in this election, or is it just again people moving out of the ANC's sort of not clutches, but stronghold?
No, I think you've got it quite right. He's a very divisive individual. I think most of your viewers and listeners would know that, but he has this most amazing charisma as any, I think, leader in his position has historically done. Where he's able to, I've actually got family in KZN. I've got a brother, he looks entrepreneur, and I'd like to think somebody who's very rational in his thinking, but don't you dare mention the words Jacob Zuma and bad.
Oh, it's
it's from the Wise family, so I have to be careful. I tend to keep quiet. So what the point is to say, he has this following, and what I think a lot of people, I think there was early analysis into it that he actually bludgeoned the IFP a lot, because he took a lot of traditional voters from the IFP into the ANC who basically just wanted let's say, a Zulu president. They didn't hide it. It was, if you live there in KZN, they're quite open about such things. And when he was seen to be, I think, stepping down, I think a lot of them felt that, listen, let's just maybe go back to a party that represents us a bit more. So that's why you saw that the ANC could not completely kick him out of the campaigning in KZN. They kept him close enough that he could be seen to still be former president of the ANC, but far enough so that, at least your business there and those types of newspapers would not ask questions about, but what's he still doing around?
Yeah, okay. I mean, we've, as I said, I don't want to sort of spend too much time talking about the results in the election, but I thought maybe if you could just close off this component and just speak to maybe some of the narratives that seem to be discussed quite a lot. So, globally, this idea of populism happening everywhere, whether it's in Europe or in North America, and the disruptive sort of things that have come out there, whether it's Trump or Brexit or people just not predicting it, and people putting it on the rise of populism. Are we seeing that in South Africa in some ways, where we've got, even though the EFF maybe wasn't as big a win as it should have been, they've grown, and the Freedom Front Plus, who both are, if you look at the spectrum, one is sort of aligns right, one aligns left, and they're the ones that seem to be sort of taking ground? Or is it just sort of a breakup of the existing, strongholds within the DA has moved into that, and then strongholds within the ANC have moved to the EFF?
Populism in South Africa is very hard in the sense that I think at the core of it, South Africans tend to be very centrist. It's always been my argument. Because look, if we had to follow, let's say, proper historical analysis of South Africa, a party like the PAC should be doing far better. Historically, should have done far better. And the natural precursor would have been a party like the EFF. And the Freedom Front Plus, with its links to AfriForum and everything else, should be doing better. So I think it's there's always we can't deny within every population there are people who do look that politics appeals to them and it's good for them. But I think there comes a limit, and I think maybe what we can see with the EFF is that I think we can maybe start assessing that maybe the threshold is 15% at best. If we have to say what populism is because I think most of the two mainstream parties in South Africa, namely your DA and your ANC, I think they, within themselves, the dynamics are so strong that within them, I think there are extremists. So, which kind of, it's a very good balancing act, because you don't allow it to ever. You can leave the party like the EFF left the ANC, but I think that was more, had nothing to do with ideology. I think it was just the fact that it was more personality based than anything else. But I think within these two parties, I think that radicalness or maybe the extremism, by the time it gets to election, I think they tend to have withered, or they tend to become a bit more mainstream. So I think we're not going to see anything in line with Trump. I think the only issue which really is driving South African politics is the material condition. And this is where all the parties, whether they were left, right, even look for AfriForum, and I'm not AfriForum, but Freedom Front Plus, which is jobs and understanding.
You're using AfriForum and Freedom Front like interchangeably. Is that purposefully done?
Yes, because I think if their history is that, look, this is where I think this is where I give them a lot of credit. Unlike the ANC and its alliance, I think the Freedom Front Plus should actually teach the ANC a few things about actually having a proper alliance partner which brings substance to the table. If you know your Freedom Front Plus, AfriForum, the union, basically, the way they actually work, it's actually very interesting, the synergy between them. They're very common, the unity in terms of what they want. And it's almost, there's a clear line between what the union does and what the party does, which is very odd, because you think the ANC would have, with COSATU, with SACP, would actually have mastered this after close to 40 years. But AfriForum and, let's say, Freedom Front Plus actually tend to do it quite well. And like you say, most people, when you tell them Freedom Front Plus, AfriForum, it takes a bit of a while to click, and then they're like, oh yeah, of course, and now we see the link. Because I live in Pretoria, so when you actually drive past the offices, you actually see them. You're like, oh, okay. Plus they've got the whole thing. So I think it's very, I find them very interesting in that setting.
And they could probably, I mean, you said, I think the Freedom Front Plus could also sort of teach the DA, maybe in some ways, because they've been, the FF Plus, not the EFF, FF Plus, have been quite, they've stuck to a message. They've stuck, this is our core principle, these are core dynamics, and we are focusing on appealing to the minorities in South Africa. Whilst the DA, the criticism that I see quite often is that they've kind of watered down their message. They've sort of moved away from their sort of founding, more liberal, classically liberal principles, and are trying to catch the maybe a disgruntled ANC voter but also adopting a number of policies that would be kind of seen to be very strongly linked with the ANC. And I think that might have caused some sort of shift out of your stronghold DA person into an alternative, whether it's a smaller party like Good or to the Freedom Front Plus.
No, exactly. It reminds me of the situation where Hillary Clinton, where I think post her losing to Trump, they asked her, some of her supporters, what did she actually stand for? And they said, look, we saw the poster, we knew first female president of America, and that's all we knew. As in, they could not tell you, look, for all his faults, Trump is very clear. The visual of the wall makes a lot of sense. And I think it's the same thing with the Democratic Alliance. I think I told you this last week. The first time I actually heard Mr. Maimane Musi speak, and I was like, oh wow, this guy, he actually has a bit of that something different about him. Was when we went to go cast his vote in Soweto. He spoke, off the cuff. It came from the heart, and I was like, but wait. And I was in studio at the time, and even the presenters were like, but why don't you speak like this throughout the campaigning? And I think that's the frustration with the DA, which is I don't know what they stand for. I'm actually very confused as to. I know they say liberal, but liberal in the context of South Africa is, I always say this: liberal for a black person and liberal for a white person, even whatever white might mean at that time, is two totally different things. And I think the fact that they don't actually ventilate such arguments, I think actually does them a disservice on the members. Because I think this issue of the Freedom Front Plus could have been easily handled had they just allowed members to actually ventilate. Because look, we don't want a situation where I think was it Hillary said the basket of deplorables, which just actually sent Trump into euphoria. Which is said not everyone that voted for the Freedom Front Plus is racist. You might just find they generally have a problem with the dynamics of the country. And I think that's maybe where political parties are a bit behind the times, where they don't allow people to ventilate their frustrations in a controlled environment.
Yeah, I think you've touched it there, and it does seem the rhetoric that's coming from the DA is a little bit of good riddance, and then again that just sort of bolsters the people that have made that decision to move, and it really sort of feeds into not the stronghold that the Freedom Front Plus has, but just it's probably helping their numbers more than anything else, and it's again making a lot of people looking at the DA just not clear. I just don't understand what they want, and it mainly was a campaign, as you said, similar to Hillary's, it was stop the EFF and ANC, and it wasn't actually anything else. And there was also this sort of sort of push also to South Africa, like to nationalism as well, which was sort of uncharacteristics of them. Yeah, I don't know if you like the We Are South Africa or the South Africa First. There was some of that. I'm misquoting it now, but I don't know if you picked up that as well. If it was just me misreading their billboards. But yeah.
That one was actually quite interesting because look, I'm not against nationalism as such, but there is an issue, and I think most of the Africans now, there's one thing, and again, it's a weakness of our politics, is that people are very sensitive about having open borders in South Africa. If anything, I come from a township, and I can tell you the general feeling is people are very upset with the way the ANC over the last 20 years has handled the issue of borders. It's not so much that they don't want migrants, it's an issue of saying we already have got dynamics in this country of the economy where we still just have to fix the formal one. So to allow people to come compete with us in an informal sector is nonsense. So I thought, wow, that is quite different from, like you're saying, it's not what your traditional liberals would actually go for. And I think this is where maybe the rise of Mr. Herman Mashaba comes into place, where for all his folly, that he's actually found a resonance with people who say, you know what, this issue of the border is quite true. But the issue again, if you've got so many messages but you say this, but then on one hand, you're agreeing with the EFF in being the same party in numerous municipalities, and like you said, the fact that we just know you're stopping ANC, stop EFF, like I said, it's almost like a scattergun approach. I'll try everything, and I'll see what sticks to the wall.
Yeah, I think it will be interesting to see where the next couple of months take us, and I wanted to maybe just sort of move the conversation into the next 3 to 6 months or whatnot. And as we're recording, I don't know if I mentioned this already, it's 23rd of May. We've got the inauguration happening this Saturday, May 25th, and cabinet being announced on the 27th. I don't know if maybe you could just speak to some of the events that you think we might see in the next couple of days with the inauguration coming out, and this is probably only going to be released next week after the fact. So I don't know what sort of response you think, and what do you think Mr. Ramaphosa will be saying when he's inaugurated? What is sort of message? It seems a lot of unity is what he's speaking about at the moment.
I think unity is I think the unity is more aimed at his party than the rest of the republic, truth be told. Because again, it's one thing where, yes, look, the ANC won the election, but most critically, Cyril Ramaphosa was seen as a major reason why they actually won this election, contrary to what the Secretary General believes. But the key thing I think going forward is it just has to be the economy. 1. 2, how's he actually going to constitute his cabinet, as in what's going to be the size, what's it going to look like? And 3, and this is where maybe the policy going forward in terms of how do you actually get the private sector to actually unlock a lot of the money which they have either overseas or here. I think that's the core message. Everything else it will be the nice flowery language about Mandela or about 1994 and this is that moment, which I think most South Africans are a bit over that, but there's always a certain population you try to appeal to for that. But the key thing will be jobs, will be size of cabinet, and 3, what it's going to look like and how he's going to enforce that. Because I think he's actually got a very, if I'm not mistaken, the NGC meeting is in December for the ANC. And if he's not seen to have really unified the party or been seen as the man in the party, look, we're not saying, we're not political espionage people here, but there are rumors within the ANC that, listen, the sad thing about it is that he's not truly got rid of the former President Jacob Zuma's faction. They're still quite strong. It's almost like a 49-48 split amongst the ANC. So he needs to be seen to work very quickly as a president, such that even if people like Ace Magashule have got the numbers, they'll be wary to say, listen, let's get rid of him. It will be an issue of saying, okay, let's at least at worst, let's allow him to save out his first term.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on a few things with what he was going to be, talking about, and probably what the focus is: jobs, economy, and something that you left out, which I wanted to touch on a little bit later. So maybe we don't have to get into too much of the weeds at the moment. But land, it seemed to be a big, it was a massive discussion prior to during the election. it saw the rise of the one party that didn't even get a seat, so I don't even have to bother with mentioning them now. But the EFF used it as a strong ploy. There was a lot of discussions with EWC expropriation without compensation. Let's not get too much into that now, but just maybe your thoughts. Is that going to be a discussion on if during his inauguration? Do you think?
No, I think you'll touch on it a briefly a bit, and the reason I don't touch on that much, this is just my opinion, and I stand to be corrected, that I think when people speak land, especially political parties in South Africa, I think there's still a confusion as to what do you mean by land. Now, the EFF has got, the policy is quite extensive when they speak about it, but I've yet to, go into a debate where I meet the general population and they can tell me, look, this is what they mean. Now, they speak about the historical injustice, which I think no one disagrees with. But I think what tends to come next is, okay, we all agree on that. What's the next? And I think until the population coalesces around that, I think political parties will forever touch on, it's emotive, you can't hide the fact, you say land, everybody will jump up in a room. But the reason I don't trust political parties, or I don't trust them enough through policy to say, listen, on my word, this is going to be a major issue, is because I think, yes, we could do the land thing now, but people will still complain about jobs. So, in fact, for me, it's almost like it's incremental. You need to sort the jobs out, and then once we're in a place where, look, there's money rolling in, then I think we can actually have that mature conversation with adults in a room to say, listen, what's the decision we're going to make concerning land? So it'll always be an emotive issue. I'm not getting away from that. But I think the burning issue when I speak to my students at the moment is, yes, land we want. That's not an issue. But you know what I'd like more than land, anything else, that I want to graduate tomorrow and make sure that I've got employment. Then I can actually start getting into this conversation.
Yeah, and I think that it interlocks so many things, and I think the discussion of immigration also changed if we move from an economy with 27 or 28% unemployment to that going on the decline. That that the people here don't see it as a competition, such a strong competition with outside immigration. So I think the jobs seems to be unanimously the biggest concern that's driving South African politics at the moment. So we touched on the cabinet slightly. I can't just go on any Twitter or whatever without somebody mentioning the fact that he's going to be trimming his cabinet size. Why is that important? Why is it sending a message? Like, is it trying to trim the fats? Like, and who do you think is going to be jostling for the positions? And like, how much of a faction of the old guard is going to be there? The reformists, the more radicals. What do you see being the makeup there?
All right. Look, is he trimming? I think it's important that he trims. Look, if you look at where I think the fifth or was it the fourth elections that President Jacob Zuma came into power, he just expanded it. He bloated. And look, everybody knew the bloating was due to the fact that he owed favors and he needed to get certain people in. Excuse me. So now, the trimming, I think it's just actually about streamlining government business. Look, for the last 10 years, government business has been very slow. There is what's the state of the nation, state of the province, and the state of different municipalities, and the time lag between decisions there has been due to the fact that I think National has not had a clear picture of what National needs to do. One only has to look at the Ministry of Small Business. No one will disagree that small businesses are the future, but how many people can actually say, listen, we actually knew what the small business ministry was doing all the way down to local level? So I think what he's just basically trying to do is, rightfully so, which is to say, listen, truth be told, I always tell my students, the Chinese government has, I think, close to between 25 and 30 ministries. Now that's a population of 1 billion plus. So there's actually never been reasoning why we have such a bloated cabinet. If anything, it's just more being for comradeship than anything else. So I think he does need to trim it down. And look, it's also about making sure in trimming it down, he has people he can put there who he can trust. Now, like you say, now the key question is who stays and who goes. And this is why I think the weakness of the ANC going forward is going to show. And I always tell people that it's not by virtue of their age. And I'm sure you've watched that Skyfall, the James Bond movie. That one of my favorite lines is by the new Q. Well, and speaking to James, age is not a guarantee. Old age is not a guarantee of wisdom, as youth is not a guarantee of innovation. So I think it's the same thing of saying, listen, the ANC, I think they're quite, when you look at who you can bring in, it's actually quite limited. Let's focus on one ministry, finance. the fact that there's still rumors that Tito Mboweni is going to be going in, clearly the man does not love that position. He's said it a million times over. He feels that he's hamstrung. I think he's got a bit of former Premier Zilla's disease with Twitter, where that's what he really wants to do. Yeah. But now the question is, he's stuck. Who can he put in Treasury who he trusts? And the numbers are so few that I think a lot of the old guard might be returning. And when they look for who's new, this is where I think that when I say they're stuck going forward, is the numbers are so limited in terms of experience and people which also international investors can also trust. And I know South Africans never like when people say that, but this is where, and I always tell people, look, we're price takers for most things internationally. And this is when I think one of the conversations which also maybe going forward, we actually need to look to say, look, South Africa's contribution, I think, to the world GDP, if I'm not mistaken, 0.33 or along those numbers, which says, listen, we need the world more than the world needs us. You saw that that's not true if you listen to South Africans speaking, that the world does seem to revolve around us. So I think he really does need people who can actually go to your Davoses, who can actually go to the US, the UN, who can actually take advantage of issues like Brexit to say, listen, how do you bring money home to South Africa? So that really does tell you that it's a limited pool of a limited amount of people he can choose from. So I'm not expecting any new names which are going to rock our boats. If anything, I'm just expecting a small niche of older people who've been there, who I think the best thing he can say, he can try promise us, is to say people who were not tainted by corruption.
Yeah, which is quite that is a small pool. I know we spoke a little bit earlier about sort of the building of alliances and the ANC having such a strong alliance for 40 years with SACP and COSATU. How is that going to factor into the decision making? Does Ramaphosa have a job to be done? So that's sort of secondary, or does he have to take that into account when he's choosing his cabinet?
For him, unlike maybe a lot more presidents, that's his actual base. If you look at how he got back into the formal politics, it was via COSATU. If you look at the Northwest Province, his biggest backers over his battle with Mr. Supra Mahema, the former premier of the province, has been the alliance partner. So for him, he is very much indebted to them, and hence I think even more so than President Jacob Zuma, pays a lot more attention to alliance politics, because that's where he himself comes from. So I think he will always have a soft spot for them, because that's his actual. You have to understand, he doesn't actually have a constituency within the ANC, because he's someone you classify as being from Limpopo but actually grew up in Gauteng. But if you were to ask him what's his branch, he doesn't really have one. His branch was actually the NUM, COSATU, and the SACP. So those are the two parties he knows he needs to keep on side going forward. But the key thing to ask is, what happens when he now starts trimming ESCOM and union members lose their jobs? Because look, you can't deny that that's going to become much of a reality. And from what I've seen, he's actually going to benefit from the weakness institutionally of these two organizations. The fact that COSATU has been hemorrhaging numbers for the last decade. The SACP is, look, I think they're only as relevant as, is it Red October? I think it's the Socialist Month. It's their birthday month or something.
Okay.
I think they're only that relevant. So he's going to benefit from their weakness, where that they know they need him more than they need each other. It's a symbiotic relationship. So that's how I view that alliance going forward. And
sort of just to push you a little bit more, like what kind of positions that he picks is going to be a signal? So like what is a signal to say that he is looking to reform and clean up the state capture, or one to show that maybe he doesn't have as much power and it's probably a Zuma faction that is still very strong, or one that says no, he's playing sort of no. And also just to let our viewers know, TK is battling a cold and he's still soldiering on, so we really appreciate your time, in spite of the fact that you're heavily medicated at the moment.
My voice normally sounds better.
Yeah, I don't know, it's kind of got this gravelly sort of feel to it, so I think I'm sure we'll appreciate it. But yeah, you see what I'm saying? What kind of signals can we look for in the makeup of the cabinet to say, okay, that's where we can say he's probably tending to go towards?
Look, for me, the big one would have to be, look, people like, it's actually more internally than anything else, because the highest ranking position, let's say the highest ranking officer at the moment of somebody who's known to openly support Mr. Zuma is Mr. Makhashula. And the fact that he's not going to cabinet actually makes it very hard. Everyone else, I mean, we've heard that people like Mr. Melusiki Gaba, Ms. Nombula have stepped back. Which look, it's a sign if that's the type of sign you're looking for. But for me, I think it's an issue of time. Going forward, I'd want to see. Look, I'm like everyone else. I want the state capture thing to be wrapped up and done with, because I think it's not illegal. I think it's important people. It's not a legal process. It's a fact. It's a fact-finding mission. For me, it's when that's done and dusted. As President of the Republic, will he have the political capital to now turn this fact-finding mission into actual charges and put it at the doorstep of law enforcement? For me, if he can do that without any challenges, that's when I'll say, you know, this man is fully in charge of the Republic. If he stalls, and by stalling I mean he'll tell us he's going to do it, but like anything in the ANC, it goes on for 3 years, and then we've been told, but look, it's gone through the process. One thing we've learned about him is that when he wants things to go quickly, they do. When he wants to stall things, the president has got that ability. So for me, that for me is the biggest I think cursor to see, has he actually got power? Is can he turn the fact finding that has gone through the Zondo Commission into an actual law enforcement document?
Okay, that's good to know. I thought in terms of deputy president, any ideas? I came across something this morning. I think somebody threw the Thuli Madonsela's name in the hat. I don't know if that was Twitter showing itself its wishes, but not really reality. I don't know. What are your thoughts there? And then we can sort of move on.
I think that actually is. I find it fascinating that someone like Didi Mabuza might decide to step down. I say that because you have to understand his history in Mpumalanga. This is a man who, look, if your favorite book is Sun Tzu, The Art of War, you clearly know that this is someone who takes a lot of time to think through his decisions. So for him to step down, I thought it would have been good for the president that he might actually go to Lituli House and he keep an eye on someone like Ace Makhashula. But then there obviously there are those murmurs which says this person actually sees himself as president of the ANC one day. So it could be an issue of saying Jacob Zuma actually showed the way that, listen, not being in government is actually the most wonderful thing for an ANC high-ranking official. You've got all the time in the world to go create your branches and do what you want. So whoever comes in as deputy, the fact that you're not the deputy of the ANC says to me it's going to be ceremonial. Hence, I don't think it will hurt him to either put a Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, who, look, I know people have their opinions based on the husband, which is not what I always want to get to, but she's actually a very brilliant technocrat. If you look at the ministry she's actually gone through, she was the one who brought in the reforms at Home Affairs, so we no longer have to wait for IDs forever. Health was not so great, but I think foreign affairs, she actually did quite a good job. So I think for the government business, I think she probably would be the best choice because she understands how government is supposed to work. But I don't see that as a precursor to saying this is the person who will now take over from President Cyril Ramaphosa, should he step down or should be forced to step down, because that power still resides within the ANC. So I think it'll be good for whoever it is, but I don't see it as anything significant.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think a lot of people see Zuma's coming in as just being part of the faction of Zuma. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out and whether or not she will take, if she does step in, what sort of position she holds and if she's got much power. But I hear your point to say that is maybe more ceremonial than anything else. Then I thought maybe we can sort of move slightly away from the next steps that we're going to be seeing over the next couple of months and move into sort of maybe a longer vision for South Africa. Like you don't have to explain to people on the street that things don't seem to be that good. GDP growth's not happening. We've got all the issues, crime, unemployment. We've had it for years. Everybody's sort of tired of it. They know about it. So I thought, there's been we also seem to say there's a lot of politics that gets discussed, but often there's not a lot of discussion about the policy that might be there to change the things that we find, the change area that we find ourselves in. We've spoken about this before, you and I, and is this idea there's a difference between politics and policy, and the way that South Africans maybe look too much at the politics opposed to the policy. I don't know if you could maybe just touch on that and just expand a bit on that.
Oh yeah, look, I think this is my bugbear with South African politics. Now, look, I think well, I think not Aristotle, but I think as a political philosopher, I'd say all things are political. And look, that's not our disagreement, but the issue is when it comes to the public administration of government, I think we've been very poor at that. Which is to say, I fully admit that, listen, before you have a policy, you go through the politics, you go through the compromises. But I think and I think the manifestos actually showed us this, where there tends to be a huge weakness is if I had to ask, just a general person, the party you support, if you run through the manifesto, if you had to cost it for me, what it would be. Now, the FF will say, look, because I think they're the most visibly out there with their one of saying expropriation without a compensation, all right. Because then the question I'd ask is, do you understand what's the total GDP contribution that the financial sector makes, namely your banks, which you want to nationalize? Because if you're saying overnight you're going to take them, what are the mechanizations that look like? And I think this is where I get my irritation comes in, that people don't actually do the cost. Because it's almost a rhetoric, which is to say, okay, we're nationalizing. Look, I have no issues with nationalization, provided you can give me a cost and you can tell me, listen, if I'm taking over Standard Bank, the big four, and I'm not going to pay them back, I fully understand that what's going to happen next is that we're going to be sanctioned for the next 10 years, and none of us are going to be able to take our money out of the country. We're going to be stuck. The ATMs will be closed. Then I've got no issue because you've costed it for me. And I think that's why I tell myself that's my introduction to policy, which is to say, you actually tell me the science behind what you're saying, which is I don't want the speech. Just give me the numbers of what you're saying. Tell me how you're going to resolve it. And I always tell people this, policy is not perfect. There is no such thing as perfect policy. What you have is, you have scenarios in it, you have what I'd like to do, but then you give us what happens when I don't get it. And look, even for Trump, for all his faults, if he actually had to look at I think during the election debate, they actually asked him, what is the cost of the war? Now, if you could think about through all the debates we had leading up to our manifestos, how many of our mainstream media actually asked our politician, what is the cost of what you're saying in your manifesto? And it's zero. Because at the heart of it, I think South Africa's like narrative. It's a qualitative narrative of, look, the ANC, a better life. But when you actually say, what's a quantitative understanding of what a better life is? Well, for me, we speak about healthcare coming at a cost. You speak about the NHI, but you don't give us the numbers for how many of our public hospitals are failing. You don't give us the numbers for how many of our healthcare professionals. Look, I mean, I'm married to a healthcare professional. How many of them go through mental breakdowns, things like that? So when I say policy, I'm not saying something which is abstract. I'm simply saying at the most basic level, what is the plan for the narrative that you're espousing? And I think we're very weak at that in South Africa.
Yeah, I think you really touched on there. Like, there's just never a query on. We've had someone on the show who spoke about fact checking on some of the. They're from Africa Fact Check or Africa Check. I'm getting the name wrong. Kate Wilkinson. And what they would do is go. If Cyril Ramaphosa says something about building how many houses on Alexander or whatever it is, and just sort of go and say, well, what does that actually mean? What does that account for? Like, how do we put a number to it? And we don't do that. Often people just sort of take these things. I mean, the NHI has been discussed for ages, but there's no understanding of what that's going to mean. And in a country where we aren't able to sort of provide these basic services at a public level, and not to say that everything's got to be at a public level. There's ramifications there that needs a number to allow people to sort of make those informed decisions. But is the foot of blame at politics? Is the foot of blame at the media, or is it at the public itself? Are they not asking the questions that the journalists need to go find out, or is it just some good rhetoric that's sort of washing the slate clean, so people don't ask too many questions?
I think it's a mixture of everything. But look, I don't have an expectation of politicians. If politicians work on the weakness or sometimes the ignorance of people. Where I would have an issue is if you, let's say, if you're in the mainstream media who get invited to a lot of these platforms, and you just sit there and you just stick a mic in their face and say, "Oh wow, what do you mean?" But then I think we do have to kind of blame it. And I have to say mainstream media because, look, that's where they feel more comfortable than to come to a podcast and say, "Listen, you're actually going to be asked for 40 minutes or so. What is your actual policy position?" So I think the media in South Africa has done us a bit of a disservice. Look, I think it does border on lazy journalism, if we have to be very truthful. it's not even about, let's say, you have to know your quants. I mean, we all know South Africans and numbers. Our former president showed us we're not the greatest at them. But the point is just to be able to tell me, look, like to have a conversation about issues of not minimum wage. I think what was the issue of is it the grants, right? A conversation which we should have started talking about 10 years ago, which was to say, look, we know what the number is because every year the Ministry of Finance will give it to us. But when now do we decide to start saying, listen, maybe grants are not working? Because you see, I'm not talking about purely numbers. I'm speaking about a policy decision which is based upon the fact that we know there's never been a country that is developed using grants, and that we know that grants initially were seen as almost like it was a way of getting people to a certain level of living, and then there was supposed to be something else. And now every discussion I've had, it's either you view as an extremist if you raise this issue, or the media just keeps quiet and says, but no, listen, you're trying to take things away from, from poor people, which confuses me a bit, because I'm saying, are you the politician, or are you a purveyor of information? And I think that confusion has to clearly, I'd have to blame more mainstream media for not asking them these type of questions.
Yeah, I think, I'd really like to probably have you back on when we maybe have a discussion on grants. I think it's a exceptionally important conversation needs to be had in South Africa. When I mean, just to talk about the numbers, I think it's something like 16 million people. I mean, you forgive me, that are receiving a grant on a regular basis, which is obviously like 2 or 3 times the tax base in terms of individuals. And there was obviously a need to get where we were in 1994 with 85% of the population being kept out of the economy forever. There was a rectifying need at that moment, but there was probably the belief that the economy would grow so that people would then jump from grants to something else, and hopefully that's something else being a job. And maybe something like a negative income tax or something along those lines could be something that will be approached. But these are questions that are maybe spoken about in a few liberal think tanks, and that's about it. It's not a discussion that's happening sort of regularly in the mainstream media, and I think there could be something had there. And it's just, you're right. You can't just redistribute people away. You can get them to a certain place to be surviving, but for us to sort of, what we really need is to get 60 million people, or however many working age people working, and growing this economy. And then we can probably rely on the social welfare system in a bit more of a sort of healthier way, such as the Nordic countries or Scandinavian countries and European, Western Europe. But we aren't there yet, and we've got a long way to go. And we probably need to follow maybe a model closer to Chile, which is a middle-income country that seems to have done a bit more better than us as a comparison, or the Southeast Asian smaller countries. So we've heard a lot of things. We've spoken about the elections. We've spoken about the next steps. A bit of a broader discussion on the landscape that we find ourselves in, and some of the policy issues that we are looking at. I wondered if you could sort of distill, we're moving into closing up now, but if we could sort of distill, or you could, not me, distill some of the key things that you think that the South African government or policymakers or maybe business needs to do in the next 5 years. Let's just put it in the next election cycle, to say that let's turn the ship around to put us in the right direction. I don't know if it's 1 point or 5 points. I would love to hear just sort of your input there.
Okay, look, my number one, which I've always been to, is I think we actually need to have a great understanding, as in numerically, of, because my specialty is local economic development, which is to say the role SMMEs in municipalities play. And I think if you look at the data, I think our government is actually been quite poor in that. This actually speaks to the bigger issue, which I think we've got actually our economic model in South Africa is a bit off. It's not in line with what we really would desire and want. So moving forward, I think we really do need to go into municipalities and actually find out, listen, where are people actually working? Where are those business? And by business, big business, I don't really believe a lot in big business. I think they actually tend to be quite a big problem for us. I'm talking about, your SMME owner, the guy who's actually put his skin in the game, who actually has a bond leverage to how business does. We actually need to help that guy to have to say, listen. And I think the key thing is, and this is where we maybe need to start being a bit more purposeful with our SMMEs. We need SMMEs that actually are export orientated, which is to say government needs to fund businesses which say, listen, the product I'm making is not just for the South African economy. We're a small economy. It's either you're moving to SADC or it's either you're moving outside our shores. So we need to find those types of business, and I think we need to heavily invest into them. Secondly, I think we need to get rid of provinces. And I know this is where, but I'm not saying obviously it's going to happen overnight, but there's certain departments in province that really play no part in helping SMMEs at all. If anything, they're a barrier to actually getting finances. And three, the reconfiguration of state-owned entities financial. By that I mean your big PIC, the ones that actually invest heavily in the country. I think those types of, I view them more as banks than anything else. We need to actually get those PIC type of state-owned entities to actually start investing in the local economy. Which now by local economy, I'm talking about your infrastructure. Where, look, I think we're a bit behind when it comes to your big infrastructure, 5G, 4G, that type of thing. And look, even your most basic, look at Gauteng, the fact that we have traffic jams when we really should just be having a very high-tech type of train, which everybody can afford, not the Gautrain, which, good idea, just bad pricing again as to how it works. The fact that, look, if you look at our ports, KZN should have, there's a huge population between KZN coming into Gauteng. There should have been a super train. There should have been doing quicker things to get people there. That's number three. And also four, look, I think we actually need to start building a proper technocracy, which is to say, listen, we might have to re-look at what does it mean to be a director general, a DG, and a lot of these positions, I think, a lot of them are very redundant. And I think we just need to actually ask the basic question, if the job this person is doing can be done by one person, why not? And I think we need probably, and this is maybe a bit more controversial, I think we need 2 or 3 super ministries which simply look at how do you get the local economy to the global audience? How do you actually have proper, understanding of tariffs? And because I think tariffs going forward is going to be the future of how the world works. And if we're a bit behind the times, we're going to simply be either a dumping site for what the Chinese and the Americans are fighting over. And three, and I think this, which is part of my last point, which I think we have been very weak in, is, look, we have to have a firm understanding that by virtue of our history, whether as sad as it is, South Africa needs to be taking more advantage of the continent. And I know South African government has always been a bit wary of being seen as a bully. Well, look, for me, I'm like, listen, we need the economy to grow. I'm not saying we're going to go now become the new America. They already call us the Americans on the continent, so we can get rid of that. But I think we do need to start taking more of a, I think more pressure positions in SADC, such that we can say, listen, yes, we understand historically we owe you a great debt, and we thank you for that. But I think President Zuma, anyway, in one of his rare honesty moments, he said it, that, listen, you can't keep complaining about issues of xenophobia, which we're not advocating, but also forget that you guys are failed governments. So it's an issue of saying we're going to come in with our investment, we're going to make sure that countries like Zim, Mozambique, and Angola do well. But in return, look, you need to put some money back into our economy. Because I think it's always been, we've always been, I think, at the wrong end of bad governance on SADC, where they can afford to mess up, know that the general population runs over to South Africa, they repatriate the money back untaxed into the economy, and everybody thinks this is a normal way of doing things. I think if we really have to be very honest, South Africa has to now start leading SADC and later on the rest of the continent, and we have to actually start taking a bit of a cut. Because the thing is, we can't go on the way we're going on now. I know the last one's a bit of a controversial one. It'll elicit some negative feelings.
Yeah, well, that's what we're here for. I mean, we want to have these ideas put out. And, I think you touched on a few things. I mean, it sounds like we've got to localize a lot, sort of maybe there's a big top. It's interesting because you've kind of said things that are a bit of a sort of contradiction in terms and somewhat, because you've said localize, get away from the top down, but you're also suggesting a bigger ministry and sort of shredding a lot of that. And I'm quite interested to see how that could work out, and removing of provinces and whatnot, but focusing very much at a lower level, because I think that's where we need change on the ground, opposed to politicians in Pretoria and Cape Town making decisions that affect everybody. I think you touched on a good, the corporates, they probably aren't doing enough in the sense of, not that they have to, they can do whatever they want, but I think it was Standard Bank shedding jobs, opposed to growing, and they are looking at ways to cut back on labour because of whether it's the minimum wage or whatever you can find yourself to say that they're cost conscious, so they are going to be shooting back. So SMEs is important. I also think what I'm hearing is also that there seems to be sort of just improving the structures that people find themselves in. If there is going to be bureaucracy, just make it, if one person can do it, let them do it, instead of getting 10 people to play solitaire at the same time. And then you still put a whole bunch of red tape. So yeah, there seems to be a lot of nuance and understanding there that I think hopefully some people listen to and sort of take action. I think, we're coming up to the hour, so I know you've been, you need to go back and get under the covers and get your med lemon. And I really appreciate your time for spending with us. It's been a fantastic conversation, and as I said, I hope we can have you back to maybe unpack a few things that we did in isolation and get into the real, deep into that conversation. Any other sort of closing words that you have, or anything else that maybe I could just ask, are you positive? Are you positive where the direction that we're going, or just you don't want to answer that? But
no. I think I would say, look, as a Christian, unfortunately, we're stuck with positivity. It's a way of the world. We can't afford to be negative. As long as we're alive, the good Lord implores us to be positive. And look, and I always say this. You've also traveled the world a bit. South Africa is one of those unique. By unique, I mean probably I'd say perhaps it's America, Australia, the UK a bit. One of those unique countries where no one really wants to move away because there's anything intrinsically wrong with, let's say, the mega picture of South Africa. Everything that is wrong it's induced by the fact that we've got poor leadership. So I'm one of those people who say, listen, when it comes to the issue of innovation, South Africans, I think we can compete with, we cannot grow maybe to the scale of America, but I think given the right time, the right education, we could do that. Farming we could do. So for me, I think we've got all the raw ingredients that says no one who in the right mind would want to leave South Africa. We probably leave because we just want a different experience. So that I'm quite positive about. But then I'm also not blind to the fact that, listen, we've been playing this game for the last 20 years, and I think we should be far better. We've been doing far better. And I think it's almost as though, look, we're approaching that old age of 30, and if things don't change, I think history shows us that it's very few countries that actually change after 30 years of independence. So if we don't actually get it right in the next 10-year cycle now, I don't know where it's going to go. But like I always tell people, I've lived in Australia, I love Australia, lovely place, but that accent gets to you after a while. Eh? It just gets to you.
I've got family there, so I can agree there. I hope they're not listening.
Yeah, so after a while, I don't want to have to go live there full time again. Look, so look, it has to work. It has to work if it means we get behind the ANC. So be it. Provided, look, I think the DA and the FF have to do a better job of actually showing that they also can come up with ideas. Because what we don't want is to be beholden only to the ANC. Because I have no issues with DA or EFF took over, provided they can say, this is where we're going policy-wise, this is what we want. And I think that's what everybody would want for the country, for it just to be better off like that.
Excellent. Okay, TK Pooe, thanks very much for the time. Please just to our listeners and to our viewers, just subscribe, and we'll put some of your details, TK, in the link below, so that people can see more about the work that you're doing and follow you on Twitter and all the rest. And please keep viewing us, and we also welcome your input. So give us a shout. What do you want to hear about discussed in Digital Discourse ZA? And if you want to be part of the conversation, also just get in touch with us. We really appreciate it. Anyway, thanks very much. Have a good one.
Thanks, Fred.
Cheers. Bye.